Hello and welcome to day 6 of the 12 Days of Christmas Cards series. This is Elena with Black Sheep 303 Creative, and today's project is a no-line watercolor poinsettia, using a bit of a watercoloring cheater method involving distress markers. So to start off, I used the Hutson Mondo poinsettia stamp set, and I stamped my poinsettias on 140-pound cold-pressed watercolor paper with sponge sugar distress ink. I did that for both of the poinsettias, and then for the leaves I stamped those in twisted citron distress ink. That is purposeful because you want to, with no-line watercoloring, stamp your image in a light colored ink so that once you watercolor over it, the stamp will fade away and look as though you didn't stamp it, hence the name no line. So for my cheater method, I'm using distress markers. I'm using barn door, festive berries, and fired brick for my poinsettia petals. And here's the cheater part. I am using the brush tip of these markers to just sort of randomly draw on some color, just in here and there in a bit of a random method. Now, barn door is the lightest, festive berries is kind of in the middle, and then fired brick is a much darker brown red. So I used the fired brick more towards the center where it would be darker, or along the outside edges. I used the barn door along the farther edges of the poinsettia, so as the petal grows out it gets lighter. So I put the barn door along that edge, and then I put the festive berries more in the middle, so that as I am blending it here with water on my brush, I'm getting a color variation and a color blend just from the markers themselves. And this is not traditional watercolor method. Obviously, with traditional watercolors, you mix your color and your water on a palette, and then you take it from the palette onto the paper with your brush, and you go from there. This is definitely a more controlled way of doing this because the color is being added first, and then I'm just blending it out with water, and I'm being very cautious with how much water I'm adding, because water is the difficult part to control with watercolor. The more water you add, the harder it is to keep color where you want it. And so this is a really easy way to create a color blend without too much water and without too much difficulty. So for beginners, I think this is a great way to try doing this. It kind of gives you a feel for the amount of water you need, which color should go where for shading, and all of that kind of thing. So if you are wanting to try this kind of thing, but you're a little scared, or you haven't had success with traditional watercolor in the past, I'd say give this a shot. It's pretty easy, and it doesn't take too long. Now, you may notice that as I am going, I am not coloring the portions of the leaves that are turned over. Like on the stamp, there are little parts where the leaf has turned to where you see the back. I'm doing that on purpose, and I will show you how I fill those in later. Again, it's a little bit of a cheating method. Now with my leaves, I'm doing the exact same thing, but I am using forest moss, peeled paint, and mowed lawn. Forest moss is the darkest color, peeled paint is the lightest color, and mowed lawn is somewhere in between, and it's a pretty bright green. So I'm tending to leave the forest moss towards the bottom and the stem. I'm putting the peeled paint along the top and the edges, and then the forest moss is the mowed lawn is kind of filling in the middles, and it does create a nice blend. Okay, so here's my method for doing the turned over parts of the leaf. I'm taking barn door, and I'm just outlining the edge where the leaf turns over. Then I take clear water, and I just pull the color from that line into the portion of the leaf that is the turned over part to fill it in. And it works really, really well. It creates a nice contrast with the rest of the leaf, so the leaf looks lighter, like it's turning, the backside is lighter, and it makes a nice definition just by coloring with making the line along the edge. It creates a nice definition, but it does blend out as you add the water. So I encourage you to try that method also. And to add in just a little bit of additional detail, I'm taking my Festive Berries marker and I'm being very sketchy with drawing like a center vein down the petals. There is no precision here. I am just trying to be like kind of loose and sketchy with the line. And then I'm just taking my water brush with just clear water and not a lot of water and just blending it out ever so slightly with that water. Now to fill in the middles of the poinsettias, I am using mustard seed with a tiny bit of wild honey. So I'm just drawing circles over the stamped image and then dotting on some wild honey and just taking my water brush and mixing those together, blending them together very lightly. For my leaf, I take the forest moss marker and then a little bit of mowed lawn marker as well. And like the leaf or the veins on the poinsettia petals, I am just adding in the veins on the leaf here. And again, just blending them out very lightly with some water on my brush. Now the blend isn't super great, but it does give a nice detail to those leaves in the end. And here I'm just finishing off the rest of the middles with the mustard seed and the wild honey. And then I take just the tiniest bit, like I take my peeled paint marker and I put my wet brush on it and just pull out a little bit of green to add into those middles because, you know, poinsettia middles often have like a tiny bit of green. So I just wanted to add that in. Now here you can see I have completed the big poinsettia also as well. And I use the exact same method and I cut them both out of the watercolor paper, leaving, you know, what is that, 1/8 of an inch border all the way around them. And I'm going to layer them together to create one large poinsettia. And I have done the exact same thing with 3 leaves. You only saw me paint 2, but I did do a 3rd one for the purpose of my layout. Now my greeting is Happy Holidays from the Hero Arts Color Layering Dimensional Bird Set. And I got my poinsettia here just for placement of the greeting. I've used my anti-static pouch on my cardstock, and now I am stamping down the greeting with some Versamark ink. And I'm going to take my gold embossing powder and coat that. I do get it a little bit in a place it doesn't belong, so I take this paintbrush that I always use for cleaning off random embossing powder and clean that off. And now I'm just going to heat emboss it with my heat gun. And it just turns from matte to shiny, and that's how you know it's ready to go. So for the layout of the card, I have tied some baker's twine in red and white around the front and tied it into a bow just above the greeting. And now I am going to layer my poinsettia together. So I grabbed some foam tape and I'm putting that on the back of the smaller poinsettia, and I am putting it really just in the middle. I am purposely leaving the edges of the poinsettia leaf or petals not glued down. I always think that this adds additional dimension when you are using foam tape. And for my leaves, I'm just taking my ATG gun and just putting a little bit on the tips of the leaves and getting that to stick down to the back of the large poinsettia and get them put in place. So to adhere the entire thing down to the card back, I first tried the ATG gun, and then the ATG gun doesn't work real well on large pieces of watercolor paper, so I throw that aside and I grab my Be Creative tape, which works really well. And I'm putting that down. And again, I am only doing it sort of in the middle. I want to leave the edges unadhered, I guess would be the word, so that it does create some additional dimension and shadow just all on its own from the fact that they're not adhered down. It really does add a little bit of a extra touch there when you don't adhere all the pieces down. So here's a trick I use with bows. Almost always when I have them on cards, I take a mini glue dot and I squish it up and I stick it behind the bow so that the bow stays in place. And that's exactly what I did here, and it works like a charm. So I thought I would make a little extra detail in the centers of the poinsettia, but my gold marker didn't look so good. So I only did a couple there and I stopped. And I also felt like I needed a little bit of additional embellishment on the card. And this is where I probably normally pull out my sequins. But for this card, since it's on craft paper and it's a little more casual feeling, I guess, it's less formal, with the sort of baker's twine and everything. I thought my Tonic Nouveau crystal drops would look great, so I pulled those out and used those instead. So I'm using Copper Penny, Silver Lining, and Red Berry, and there you can see I've done most of them, and then I'm going to put the Copper Penny just in the middles of the poinsettia middles. I don't know what those are called, the like centers of the flower, just to add little extra dots in the centers. And that is the finished card. And there you can see the little bit of added dimension there when I didn't adhere down the edges, as I mentioned. And there you get a good look at the watercolor and how dimensional it really looks, even though it was a complete watercolor cheat. And that is the completed card from above. So if you are intimidated by no-line watercoloring or watercoloring in general, I would say give this method a try. It's definitely easier than traditional watercoloring and gives you a similar look, and it actually takes, in my experience, a lot less time. So hopefully you'll give this a shot. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everyone who's stopping by for my Christmas card series. There's a supply list linked below in the video description and over on my blog at blacksheep303.com. Please come back tomorrow for day 7. Happy holidays!